Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
I mean,
I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye.
What does confrontational mean? It means you'll fight for what you believe.
Enough was enough! And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother!
It is not merely our privilege to be strong, it is our duty to be strong.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is watching this live on YouTube, Facebook and Rumble. If you are watching live, you can contribute by the chat. Let us know your comments and your questions, and at some point I'll put the link in the chat if you want to call in. I know last time we had this particular guest on, we had about 3 callers, so don't be shy. We love hearing from our audience, so wait for that link and call in if you can. If you are watching this later, also welcome, and thank you for all your support. Remember, you can like and subscribe and comment and all that jazz. It does help with the analytics and getting this information out there. But if you want to support us, the best way to do it is by heading to Buy Me a Coffee. You can throw us a few dollars there. It helps to pay for the stream. It helps to pay for the website. And also, most importantly, gives me a warm and fuzzy feeling inside because it is very nice to know that people want to part with their hard-earned money to support us. So if you can, please head there and it would be much appreciated. Also, if you want to keep up to date with everything that's happening on Commanding the Narrative and the ex-candidates, please head to commandingthenarrative.com. Very easy to remember, commandingthenarrative.com. Hit the sign up button on the top right-hand corner and you'll get a weekly newsletter with all the updates, podcasts, articles, events, maybe just some of my own thoughts that you might be interested in. And it's the best way to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. We just had a big weekend, a big day on Sunday. Well, it was a big weekend, actually, because we had the misinformation and disinformation rally that I went to on Saturday. That was an important event. And also on Sunday, we had the Environment and Energy Forum. So we're waiting for some footage of that from ADH TV. When that comes out, I'll let you know. I'll post the link and you'll be able to watch that forum. It was a great forum. We had a lot of great feedback. A lot of people have contacted me saying we want to have the forum in our area to try and educate the people that are close to us. So we will keep rolling with that concept. But you can find it on Chris Covery's YouTube page and also Billboard Battalion. They had a live stream on their Facebook, so you'll be able to watch it there as well. We had a whole bunch of great speakers and some really challenging issues and topics that we discussed. And one of the speakers I have waiting today. But before I get there, I just want to quickly let you know also about the Light newspaper. Now, with misinformation and disinformation legislation looming, hopefully it does get defeated, but it is looming there. Hardcore newspaper copies like the Light might be the best way of getting information out there in the future, but it still is now. Even now, it's important because it is unfiltered, uncensored truth. So if you want to help get the Light newspaper out there, please head to the Light website. You can click on the top menu and click distribute, and you can sign up to be a distributor in your area. Or if you are close to the Northern Beaches in Sydney, you can call the number 0406 861 816. There's a pallet already been paid for. All we need is for people to pound the pavement and get out there and letterbox or put it in a local news agency, or put a whole bunch of them in a local medical center, or wherever you might find freedom-loving people that want to get the truth out there. So if you want to be a distributor, please call that number 0406 861 816 if you are in Sydney or close to the Northern Beaches. Now, as I mentioned, I've got a guest today. He's a returning guest. We've had him on quite a lot because I love hearing from him. He's a wealth of knowledge across so many different issues. And he was at the Environment and Energy Forum on Sunday, so I think it's only fitting that we speak to him now. Here he is, Mr. Kevin Loughrey. How are you, mate?
Oh, it's very good. And thank you very much, Stephen, for having me on again. I'm really appreciative.
No, it's always fantastic having you on. I have to admit to the audience that you had a presentation ready for the forum, and I even had a little bit of my own censorship going on. I had to ask you to change it just because of the machinations that we're in, the setting that we're in, and some of the other personalities that were involved in the forum. But this is a completely different beast, this podcast, and it's an open discussion and open platform. So I reached out to you, Kevin. I said, let's do your original presentation on this podcast, and let's dive into all the issues that you wanted to talk about, because as I said to you, I agree with everything that you're saying. It's important to talk about it. So I guess we should dive into it today. But firstly, how did you find the forum? I know you came down to Sydney at great expense and you gave up your own time to do it all the way from Ballina. What were your thoughts of the actual forum?
It was very, very well managed and handled. And thanks to you, Stephen. I often say you've missed your vocation. You should have been a quiz show host or a commentator in the current affairs. You've got an excellent stage presence, excellent voice, and very, very logical, and takes a lot to fluster you. Everything just went very, very smoothly. So from that perspective, it was excellent. And from another perspective, it was also excellent in that I got to meet a whole lot of people, and I got a lot of very positive feedback, and we were able to discuss things, fly kites. Barnaby Joyce was there, which was really good, and so we had various people, in fact, who are luminaries in this area. They're Paul was there. Paul Vallejo. Vallejo. Yeah. He's expert in nuclear energy, so he had a lot to say. No, it was a very good lineup, and I very much enjoyed it. And I liked at the end sort of challenging the people with. Yeah, and we're going to go into that today, and that was very useful also. A lot of people came up to me afterward and said that was just brilliant. That was gobsmacking, and so we got really good feedback.
Do you want to dive straight into your presentation first?
Yeah, and then we can spend some time talking about those things which are of most interest to you that we discussed previously. So, yeah, let's do that, and so that the audience understands. Well, I won't shortcut my presentation by summarizing it now. So we best go into it, and then the audience will understand the significance of what we're talking about. And as the slide says, the presentation was originally intended for another venue, and it was altered to be more targeted to that venue, and quite rightly so. I was very happy to make those changes. It was your presentation, your venue, and you knew the audience, and so we did what you suggested, and it worked really well. And thank you, Stephen, for that. This original presentation was intended. This is the original presentation, I should say, and it's intended for a more general audience, and will in fact act as a segue into a later discussion that we're going to have here. Now, when I walked up onto the stage, I said, look, I could talk about the fact that here are two plots. The top plot is temperature, and that was taken from an ice core in Greenland going back 8,000 years approximately. In fact, 10,000 years. But for 8,000 years, you can see that the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere has been cooling, and the tip of the arrow there is where we're at now. So you can see that the world was a lot warmer, a couple of thousand years ago, anybody who suggests that because of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere we're going to burn up is just an out-and-out fraudster. Now, adding to that, we have an ice core from Antarctica where they measured the amount of CO2 that was in the atmosphere, the concentration of it. And you can see as the temperature's been dropping, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere has been increasing. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we see that that was 8,000 years of cooling. And you might say, well, it's been getting warmer because of industrialization, which is causing an increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Something, by the way, which I disagree with. I don't believe that human emissions are, in fact, the root cause of the increased concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But here we've got actual raw temperature data taken from temperature measuring stations around Australia that have not been encroached upon by urbanisation. So cement, bitumen, and slowing down the breeze and air conditioner outlets and jets on runways and so forth have not affected the readings. Now, the khaki colour over to the left is taken from handwritten records in Australian archives. Then we move into the Postmaster General's Department, which was then subsequently taken over by what was then the newly formed Bureau of Meteorology. And then in 1998, the Bureau of Meteorology decided that they would change out the analog systems for digital. And that wasn't a bad thing to do because it would reduce the amount of labour that was involved. And if properly done, it could give you better accuracy and maybe more data, particularly as to what happens during a day, as opposed to just taking measurements at a set time in the day. You'll notice that in 1998, the temperature starts to go up. And the reason for this was that the Bureau of Meteorology put their digital systems into a smaller box. The box is called a Stevenson screen, and it has louvers on it so that air can flow through. And if you make the box smaller, then as the box warms up, it radiates onto your instrumentation. And it's now been found that these smaller boxes produce much higher, and when I say much higher, it's all relative. We're talking like 0.5 degree to 1.5 degrees, depending on how much sunlight is striking the box. But it does significantly change your reading when you're doing that sort of graph. If we could go back again to the graph, and we'll move on to the American data. Now, the American data goes from the early 1900s, and you can see that the American data actually looks quite similar to the Australian data in terms of its ups and downs.
Well, I was going to point that out, Kevin. You look at the trend line, it's almost exactly the same.
Yeah. And so are the ups and the downs. And I call it Loughrey's law of open systems. And that is that a trend in one part of an open system will be found in all parts of an open system unless there is a local influence causing it to be otherwise. It's sort of like a mirror image of Pascal's law for incompressible fluids in a container. Pascal pointed out that pressure in one part of the container will be found in all parts of the container. Well, the same applies to an open system in terms of trends. And whether your instrumentation is accurate or not, provided it is consistent, a downwards or a reduced measurement means a downwards trend, no matter how you look at it. You could have, for example, a speedometer in a car that's registering 10% more, like my Toyota does. I think they do that deliberately too, by the way. But when it says I'm doing 110, I'm actually doing about 100 kilometers per hour. But the fact of the matter is that when I'm doing 100 kilometers an hour on my odometer or my speedometer, I'm definitely going slower than what I was when it was 110 kilometers an hour reading. The same goes with your temperatures. Now, the Americans are in the northern hemisphere on the other side of the world. And there was no way that the teams, and we're talking thousands of public servants doing this over many, many years. In the Australian context, there's 19,000 measurements that make up that graph. Now, there was no way that they could collaborate. And as a consequence, one can reasonably assume that the downward trend in Australia is the same as the downward trend in America, e.g., that over the last 140 years, the maximum temperatures have been gradually declining, despite the fact that carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is rising. So if we move on to the next graph, this really clinches it. This is from the Japanese Meteorological Agency. Now, remember, we had Australian data, we've got American data, and now we've got Japanese data. And once again, no chance or highly unlikely that the Japanese meteorologists were collaborating with Americans or Australians. And this is from their Antarctica weather station from 1960 to 2020. And the trend is downwards, despite the fact that the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is rising. And there's Loughrey's law of open systems, open atmospheric systems. If we move on to the next slide, there's another little thing that a lot of people now know about this because it's been publicized, but there's something else that people don't appreciate. The leaf area of plants on the planet have actually grown by greater than 11%. Professor Happer used 15%, and I won't disagree with him. I'm being conservative here. But the amount of carbon dioxide that a plant absorbs is proportional to its leaf area. So in other words, since 1985 to 2015, plants have been or are now absorbing 11% more carbon dioxide than they were back in 1985. Now, if human emissions are 3%, then the plants are absorbing 3 times more than humans are emitting. That tells you that human emissions are not what is causing the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's a slam dunk. It's like a queue. If you can imagine a queue at a stadium, as people arrive, if more people arrive than are being processed, then the queue gets longer. That's the same with carbon dioxide. If more carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere than is being processed by the plants, then the concentration rises, the queue gets longer. If, on the other hand, more box offices open and the queue and the carbon dioxide is being processed at a higher rate, then the queue ought to decrease. It's not decreasing, it's increasing. And Professor Don Easterbrook, a Canadian, actually has said that the carbon dioxide's coming from the sea. And Professor Arthur Vitorito of Florida, who has studied submarine volcanoes for over 20 years, he too is of a similar opinion that this carbon dioxide is coming from the sea, and it's coming in huge volumes compared to what humans are putting out. You'll hear people say, oh, we're putting out gigatons. Well, nature is putting out petatons. We're talking like 1,000 times more capacity than humans. So we move on to the next slide.
But what you're saying is, even though that's happening, the plant life is sucking it all up. So
but we've still got an increasing concentration because the plants aren't sucking it up at the rate that the ocean is adding it to the atmosphere.
Okay.
And if we move on to the next slide, this further knocks it home. When we had the COVID shutdown, virtually all international travel ceased and industry was really curtailed. And you see up there's the lockdown. Now you notice that we call it the acceleration of the curve, which is the gradient. You notice that the curve didn't even take a blink. So in other words, if we were to shut down the planet like we did with COVID, it's not going to make a single iota of difference. There is no point in the world trying to reduce, that's humans that is, trying to reduce their carbon dioxide output. It will have absolutely no effect to the gradient of that curve. Ba-boom. I rest my case. This is lunacy. It honestly, this is a huge fraud. It's inspired by, in fact, I believe that the CCP is at the back of this, but the CCP found that there are a whole lot of avaricistic businessmen. There's the World Economic Forum. There's anti-human influences that are evident in the environmentalist movement, where they believe humans are terrible and we've got to reduce the population of the world back to around about 500 million people. And so the Chinese communists are saying, you beauty, go for it, because it's totally wrecking Western economies. And the Chinese have as their stated aim that by 2049, 100 years after they took power in China, they intend to be the supreme power of the world. And when they're the supreme power of the world, the chappies in the World Economic Forum and the Bill Gateses of this world and so forth will become organ donors. In fact, most probably their organs aren't going to be good enough to donate. So they'll just get exterminated. They're gone. It doesn't matter how rich they are, they will be exterminated.
When I went down to Oberon for the symposium down there at the dinner afterwards, I was talking to someone and they had overheard a conversation with that someone was having with Allegra Spender in a pub. She went on this pub crawl to meet her constituents. And apparently this person said to them, can we change the weather here in Wentworth? And she said, of course not. So he said, well, what makes you think we can change the temperature here in Australia? We all live in the one atmosphere and we're still digging coal and out of the ground and exporting it to China and India and Japan and Korea, and they're burning it and putting it in the atmosphere. So we're continuing to do that, yet we can't burn coal here for our power stations. What kind of madness is that? We're exporting our cheap, reliable energy and importing their expensive, unreliable energy. And it makes no sense at all.
No. I wonder when Australians will wake up. I'm trying my hardest to go around and deliver presentations and lectures to anybody who will listen to me. But as you know, I just went through a council election and anybody under 30 went over and took a Greens how to vote.
Yeah.
They indoctrinated in our schools. I went down to the Empire Vale School, which has just been reopened. They've done the most magnificent job. It got totally wiped out in 2022 by the flooding we had here. And so we're all gathered there, and all these little school kids, beautiful kids, sitting on the floor. And the parliamentary secretary from Sydney came up to open the school. And the very first thing he said was, oh, we're on Bundjalung land. You know, we're on Aboriginal land, and I'm going to pay my respects to elders past and present. What they're doing is just indoctrinating the kiddies to believe that we're on stolen land. And they're selling lies that, and I've already spoken on the radio about this, that, you know, we went off and massacred all of the Aborigines and so forth. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every administration from the first settlement through to the present day has tried their hardest to assimilate Aborigines into modern day society. And to a large degree, they've been successful. You think of all of the people in our society now who are of mixed race, who are part Aborigine and part European. The greater majority of them are. The ones which most need the help are not getting the help. We're spending $200 million a day. And I know I've gone off on a tributary, but it is related to this presentation, as you will see later down, or as the audience will see. You already know where this is heading. But that's what this guy, and were it not for the fact that my wife was with me, I would have stood up immediately and upbraided that gentleman. Just said, look, why are you doing that? Why are you saying this? What's the point of it? Tucker Carlson dealt with this during his tour. He said, if anybody's constantly telling you that you're a stranger in your land, that you're an interloper, they hate you. They hate you. And that's what's going on right at this moment. And I would actually implore anybody to, if you feel as strongly as I do, and provided you're not going to embarrass your kids or your wife, Next time some galah stands up and starts saying, I'm going to pay my respect, or even tries to tell you that you're on someone's property, like Bundjalung land or whatever, or, the Wajira or so forth, just say, listen, that's rubbish. We've got no idea what tribe was here 100 years before we arrived, but we do know that the Aborigines regularly went over and butchered the other tribe, took their women, and tribal boundaries moved everywhere.
When I was at school, we were taught that the Aboriginal people were nomadic and they moved around depending on the circumstances and the seasons and everything like that. Now we're told no, they actually had nations and they had this area was their nation and this area. I mean, it completely moved on from what we were told 20 or 30 years ago.
And it's lies upon lies upon lies. And our little kiddies, those little kiddies sitting there, were being indoctrinated because the teacher will tell them 2 and 2 makes 4 and a whole lot of other facts. And then the teacher will slip in a lie. And the kiddies can't differentiate between the two because this person is their teacher. This person knows everything. And this person's just told them that, the early settlers were really bad people and this is stolen land. The Greens, every time they open their mouth in the council elections, they'd say, I pay my respects to, this is the Bundjalung land and I pay my respects and this is Aboriginal land and always will be. And I'm sort of thinking, okay, sunshine, I'm waiting for you to give up your house first.
And Kevin, I was reading an article the other day where someone was complaining that whenever they go to a yoga class, they do a welcome to country. I mean, this stuff is happening all over the place. And any event that I organize, I make sure that I play the Australian national anthem in the beginning.
I love that. You did that at Guildford. It was beautiful, mate.
I did. And you wouldn't believe the people that came up to me afterwards and said, thank you for playing the anthem. Like that one simple thing that used to happen all the time, playing the Australian national anthem, people are now coming up to me saying, thank you for doing that. Like it's a revolutionary act.
Yeah, I get goosebumps every time. I got to tell you, I get goosebumps. I just love it. I think,
but it just shows how far we've come, how far we've devolved. That that playing the anthem is somehow something that needs to be
an extraordinary act.
Yeah, exactly.
Fancy you being patriotic. Yeah.
Anyway, let's get.
You'll be described as far right. You realise you're far right.
As Ian Plimer says, far right's the place to be.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So
next slide. Okay. Well, for all of this reduction of carbon dioxide, they've brought in wind and solar systems, and these provide intermittent power. Now, the green graph, the green line, which you really can't see as green in here because of the sort of resolution, but the curve that you see coming up from the bottom on the right-hand side is the amount of intermittent power that's being injected into the grid. And the line that's running from left to right is the cost of electricity. And you can see that as we inject more and more intermittent power into the grid, it becomes less and less efficient and the cost of electricity goes up and up.
But
and
Kevin,
that's a reality.
The teals will tell you that wind and solar are the cheapest forms of energy.
As they said in the castle, you're dreaming, son. Michael Caton's famous words, you're dreaming, son. Look, as Barnaby Joyce rightly pointed out, look at your bill. Look at your electricity bill and then tell me that this is cheaper. It's not. And go over and check out the cost of electricity in Germany and the United Kingdom, now that they've virtually destroyed their nuclear systems and they're trying to run on this intermittent power. Look, when the sun is shining, you may have 3 gigawatts of electricity coming from your rooftop solar. And if you're generating electricity using a power station, you've got to match the supply with the demand. So if somebody's now suddenly injecting 3 gigawatts of power into the grid, you've got to shut down your base load facility by 3 gigawatts. The way they do it is they just pump it into the dirt. It just gets pumped into earth. They can't stop the machines from spinning. You know, these are big machines like a ship. You just can't turn it on a dime.
So what it's doing,
all of that electricity is wasted.
And it's making the production of electricity more expensive, which they pass on to the consumer.
Yep. And they're doing it in a sneaky fashion in that they're paying the consumers tax money. They're pulling money from consolidated revenue. Like, you know, people at my age get a certain amount of money to reduce the impact that high energy costs are having on us. It's something like, you know, $100 a quarter or something. I'm not sure of the total amount, but it's just basically robbing Peter to pay Paul. The cost of electricity is going through the roof. Let's look at the next graph.
And then you can add in the carbon credits and all that sort of stuff and the scam that's going on there. But let's not go there.
Now, this is what's happened to the cost of electricity. The blue line is the consumer price index. The red line is the cost of electricity. And you can see that it's just going up. In fact, it's gone up 6 times the CPI. All the while, we're being told that wind and solar are cheaper. Now, I've read Gen Cost from cover to cover, and it is an atrocity. If I was a lecturer at university and one of my students gave me Gen Cost, I would send them back a year. I would say, you've got to go back. And if you ever dish up this crap to me again, I will go to the professorial board and suggest that you are not suited for this and that really you should take up journalism because you're writing fiction. There is no way that when you look at Gen Cost, it's just a mess. It is a total aberration of logic. They are trying to say that wind and solar are cheaper, but they don't ever come down to saying, okay, let's look at a system cost. How much will it cost us? What will be the cost per kilowatt hour for electricity generated by this means? And I want to see the whole plan. I want to see a Monte Carlo simulation of weather so that we can work out when the wind's not going to be blowing, when the sun's not going to be shining, where are you going to get the power from to meet demand? How are you going to get the power from all of these solar cells and windmills strewn all over the countryside to the point where it has to be consumed? They haven't done any of that. They haven't worked out the cost of all the wires. They haven't worked out how they're going to store sufficient energy such that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun's not shining, where are you going to get the energy from? Because industry's not going to stop. Mind you, some Greens, who are not really in touch with reality, have suggested that industry will slow up and speed up depending on the availability of energy. We'll have flexible industry.
Well, I think South Africa really is a crystal ball. And if you want to see where this is leading to, have a look at South Africa and how they have to ration energy. And there's certain times of the week where you have blackouts and that sort of thing. So that's the crystal ball. Go have a look at South Africa and you might see a bit of our future in that. But let's keep going because we have a lot to talk about today.
Sure.
So you want to move to the next slide?
Yep. Okay. Look, what we're going through with regard to climate change, the climate change scam, is really only one part of a huge mess. This country's been deindustrialized. We only have 24 days of liquid fuel in reserve in this country. And if we were to be cut off by, for example, the communist Chinese, and it would be very easy because they now have the biggest navy in the world, and they're going to get bigger, then within 24 days, our defense force would cease to function. Over on the right-hand side, we are now $1.3 trillion in debt, and we have absolutely nothing to show for it. Nothing. We're $1.3 trillion in debt. That is eye-watering. I mean, that's 12 zeros in case someone's having a hard time understanding how big this number is. 1 billion's 9 zeros, 1 million 6 zeros. That's 12 zeros. $1.3 trillion in debt when you add up the state debt and the federal debt. And our kids, our grandkids, and their successors are going to have to pay this mess off if this country isn't conquered. Let's move to the next slide. Now, here's the next one. How about mass murder? The government denied access to early treatment. It actually interposed itself between doctors and patients. And that resulted in the untimely death of thousands of elderly Australians. Right now, these messenger RNA injections, and they're not vaccines. They changed the definition of a vaccine so that they could sneak this through. But these are gene therapies. This messenger RNA is designed to go into your cytoplasm of your cell and cause your cells to produce a synthetic S protein, which then your body is supposed to develop antibodies for. The reality is that this mRNA is getting in, or rather the things which cause the mRNA, it's getting into all of the cells around your body, particularly your gonads, like your ovaries or your testes. It's getting into your heart. It's getting into your brain. And if we can go back to that slide, over to the right-hand side, courtesy of Dr. Wilson Tsai, somebody I have enormous respect for. He is, in fact, an expert in data analysis. You see the red curve and the green curve. The green curve are the number of doses of mRNA, I'll call them vaccines for want of another name, that have been issued. And the red line is the excess deaths, that is the above average deaths in Australia. And what Wilson has done is he's taken the green curve and moved it 21 weeks down the track. So what that's telling you is that 21 weeks after people have these injections, they die. Now, by the way, there's a big lump there that at the beginning as well. My son-in-law's parents both were injected in Canberra, and they must have gotten a really good shot because a couple of days later, they both dropped dead suddenly with massive heart problems. And in the case of Penny, she, as far as I know, had no heart issues at all until she was injected with this toxic garbage. So these guys, not only have we gotten to a country where we only have 24 days of fuel, 1.3 trillion in debt, deindustrialized, they set about murdering us. And it's a multifaceted thing. The Aboriginal industry, which you and I touched on before, that's part of this attack as well. The idea is to divide our country. That's why the president of the Communist Party, when he was at university and is now the prime minister, was so interested in getting the voice through. If that had passed, if that referendum had passed, we would have effectively a government based on apartheid. We would have one group of our society on the basis of their race having a privileged role in the executive and the legislature of our government. And Commie Albanese and his little commie mates tried to pull that one off, and the Australian people said, no way, we're not having this, and we got lucky. But this is a concerted
Thank God the people
attack.
will wake up.
There's no doubt that this is a concerted attack. This isn't happening by accident. All of this stuff, the gender dysphoria. We've got a situation now where little 9-year-olds at school are being asked whether they're comfortable with their genitalia. Can you believe that? I mean, it's unbelievable, but they're doing it. They're doing it. So let's move on to the next slide. My colleagues and I are presently assisting Dr. Miley Trinh. Dr. Miley Trinh will go before the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal, and the intent there is to deregister her. She's been suspended now for almost, I think, 3 years, close on 3 years, because she failed to obey government guidelines with respect to the treatment of people suffering from COVID-19 or vulnerable to COVID-19. And she did this after extensive study. She really thoroughly looked into it and came to the conclusion that hydroxychloroquine combined with zinc and azithromycin was an effective cure for COVID-19 in its early stages. And then she moved on to ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, vitamins D3 and C, aspirin, and she also studied what to do with late stage COVID-19. And it's absolutely no doubt in my mind that she has saved countless lives. And she's been absolutely steadfast about this. She did exactly what a doctor should do. She put her career behind her. She put her patients' needs in front of her career. And that's why I actually was recommended to Dr. Miley Trin by Dr. Brian Tyson of California, because I'm known over there for, my advocacy of early treatment, and basically supporting people like Professor Dr. Peter McCulloch, Brian Tyson, Harvey Risch, Professor Dr. Harvey Risch, and so forth. They're all terrific people, but our government decided it would interpose itself between doctor and patient. And a number of other doctors have also fallen victim to this. A terrific guy by the name of Dr. Mark Hobart, Dr. Dennis Borzes, who I've never heard of before until Mark put me onto him. And then you've got Dr. William Bay and Dr. Paul Oosterhuis. They have all been either deregistered, or in the case of Paul, he said, I'm not putting up with this nonsense. And he just retired because he was getting towards the end of his career anyway. And he said, I won't suffer the ignominy of being tried by idiots. I know what I was doing was right. I know I was right to express concerns about what was happening. And he's now retired, but all of these people are terrific people. They are exactly what you want a doctor to be, somebody who will put you way ahead of their own interests. So
we're getting to the core of this podcast and what we want to really discuss.
Why has this happened? How is it that that these attacks have been so successful? Well, the reality is that we have poor quality political candidates. In other words, from pre-selection and from people nominating themselves. And then that combined with poorly conducted elections, that leads us to poor quality parliamentarians who have far too much power, because the present structure of the government and the deficiencies that we have in the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia. It's a chain of events. One thing leads to the next, to the next, to the next, and to the next. And one of the objectives I have set myself is to try and educate the public as to what's going on here. I believe that every Australian, regardless of your political affiliation, every Australian is in grave danger, because there are forces at work in this world who are exploiting what I just showed you on that last slide. They're exploiting it. The head of ASIO actually is on record now of saying that at least one politician has been bought. I can say from my experience as a military officer and the stuff that I saw, it's a lot more than just one politician. A large proportion of our politicians have been bought by the Chinese Communist Party. And some of them don't even know that they've been bought, because the money comes through cutouts. The people, for example, that the money that's coming for the Greens, if you were to track it all the way back, you'll find that it's coming from wealthy elites and from the Chinese Communist Party. Because the Chinese Communist Party is saying, this is just fabulous. We've got these gifted idiots down in Australia and in West Germany, in Germany and in the UK, who are going to run around and cause all sorts of mischief. So let's feed them a bit of money wherever we can. Let's own the media. Let's own Hollywood, and let's control the narrative. And that's what this is all about. You watch any movie now, you'll see that there are all of these subtle little things that come in that are trying to normalize certain things, which are not really normal, but that you'll always find it in the movies, the modern movies now.
Yeah, definitely. So you want to move to your website?
Yeah,
because a lot of the stuff, this stuff that you're talking about has already been fleshed out. You've fleshed this out over a while now, and you've uploaded it all to your website. So we've talked about your website in the past. It is a resource for people to dig into and find more of your thoughts.
Yeah.
Do you want to direct them exactly where to go in relation
Well,
to
if
this?
you go to the next slide, and this is kevinloughrey.com.au, and this is what it looks like. And down the left-hand side, third from the bottom at present, those buttons will move as I add things, of course, but it's pretty stable. You will see ideas and opinions. And if you click on that button, it then takes you through to this. And one of the ones which I have now fairly exhaustively written, and it's a little bit like plasticine, you mold it and you get friends to comment and so forth, and then you go back and you mold it a little bit more. Well, it's just about the finished shape, and that's election reform, I've called it. And you just go to kevinloughrey.com.au/election/reforms, plural, .html, and you can read all about what I believe we should do to change the way that we conduct our elections. And that's what it looks like. And from there on, we go. Now, I don't know, Stephen, whether it's possible for you. In fact, the audience won't be able to see what we're talking about anyway, so I'll just cover it verbally. The very first thing that I say in my election reforms, I actually look at whether we should have optional or voting by volition, voluntary voting, or whether we should have compulsory voting. And I come to the conclusion in my, mullings that we should have compulsory voting. That, in fact, now you've taken us to the actual website, the reason that we should have compulsory voting is that money plays a lesser role. In America, money plays a big role in who gets elected. And the money is used both for advertising and also to get people out of their houses and to get them to go and to go and vote. Whereas if we say, no, everybody's got to vote whether they want to or not, you'll go down there and you'll vote. Now, the big problem we have with compulsory voting is that you have a lot of people who are uninterested. Disinterested means that you're impartial and unbiased. Uninterested means you couldn't give a damn. And a lot of people couldn't give a damn. And I've just witnessed that in the council elections. 13% of the votes were informal. And a lot of the votes were just 1, 2, 3 on the ballot paper. They just did 1, 2, 3. And that is the reason.
What I found, Kevin, is that a lot of people didn't even know what ward they lived in. So if you don't know what ward you live in, how do you know who you're going to vote for?
Yeah, I'd put that at least 10%, possibly going as high as 20% in some. I went around to the various polling stations and did the usual busking of trying to hand out my how to vote card to anybody who would wander within my vision. And you're quite right. And it could be as high as 20% turned up and didn't have a clue what ward they were in, let alone who the candidates were for that ward.
And you learn so much standing on those booths, just the psychology of people and where their mindset is. You get a real feel of where the electorate is at, just standing on those booths. Yeah.
Yep. And you see, what I've come to this conclusion that we have to actually structure our system of voting so as to nullify the effect of the uninterested voter. Just dwelling on that question, on that the business of the uninterested voter a little more. When you actually nominate to run for office, they have a drawing of balls out of a cage, or they draw pieces of paper out of a box to determine the order of presentation of the candidates on the ballot. Now, the reason they do that is that everybody knows that if you get the first position, you've got somewhere between a 2 and 5% advantage over other people who come further down the ballot. Now, that should not happen.
It's called the donkey vote.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And from what I saw, that advantage could be as high as 10%, from the council elections. Maybe further on, people are more, diligent.
We've spoken a little bit about the election reforms with you in the past, so I encourage people to go back and watch the previous episodes that we've done with you. But I want to focus today on the separation of powers issue, because this is something that you brought up during the Q&A at the forum. So, as I said, you had your presentation, which was heavily censored by Stephen Tripp, but during the Q&A with everyone on stage, you really had an opportunity to, I guess, let fly and really open up the engines and just let everyone know your true thoughts. What I might do is I might play. what I might play is that clip, and I want people to, if you are watching this, I know some people just listen to the audio, but if you're watching the video of this, I just want people to pay particular attention, firstly to what Kevin's saying, but also the reactions of the other people on the stage as well.
So lucky is to get high quality people into our government that we will succeed. We have been a very fortunate nation. We've had a cart that's ridden along a nice smooth road, and now we're going cross country and the wheels are going to fall off. That's a fact. Our system of government is grossly defective. The fact that you would take people from a political party, put them into a legislature, and then from this mediocre group of people, select people who will in detail run your government departments. There is no proper separation between the executive and the legislature, and there's no proper separation between the judiciary and the legislature and the executive, as we've just recently witnessed with Helen Rolfe and Dr. Julian Fidge in her ruling. We have a corrupt judiciary and we've got a corrupt government, and they look after themselves. Please go and have a look at my site. Look at election reform. I'm going to be mounting a High Court challenge against above and below the line voting, because since 1984, we haven't had a truly independent senator elected to the Senate. The Senate is supposed to be a house of review. The framers of our Constitution deliberately tried to have the Senate be of a different political complexion to the lower house, so that it could properly function. But when you have the same zealots in the same political parties in the lower house as the upper house, you no longer have a house of review. You no longer have a check against capricious and abusive legislation. And when that legislation is driven by oligarchs who have paid off our politicians, you are in dire peril. I believe that every senator must disavow themselves of any political party or any political organisation before they run for the Senate. That would ensure, to some extent, just as we require any person running for the federal parliament to disavow themselves of another nationality. When they get to the Senate, they must not be following a party policy, and that should be driven home to them. We have a seriously deficient system of government. There is no way that someone can properly represent you in your electorate if they are also a minister with portfolio. They have to give 100% of themselves to one job or the other. The fact of the matter, both jobs will suffer. So the consequence, I keep on coming back to it, we need a separation of the executive from the legislature. And the only sensible separation is that we elect the Governor-General, and we allow the Governor-General to select the heads of government departments with the approval of the Senate. We need to elect an Attorney-General, and that Attorney-General must not be a part of the legal profession if that Attorney-General is to look after us. Thank you.
So I hope people could hear that, because the sound was a little bit light, but did that come okay through to you, Kevin?
I'm gobsmacked that I was that articulate, because that was really extemporaneous. I mean, I deliberately put myself in the center of the stage there, but I had no clue as to what opportunity I would get to hammer home the point that everything that's happening to us is because we have poor quality politicians who have far too much power. I mean, you've got an idiot driving the truck. It's really that. I mean, you look at the people who are running the government departments, the ministers with portfolio. What qualifications do they have to be the Minister for Finance or the Treasury or Immigration or education. They haven't. You know, this is nuts. You wouldn't run a company this way, but we're running a, you know, 1.5 trillion, 2.5 trillion economy this way. And that's why we're easy meat for enemies, domestic and foreign. We are easy meat. And the political parties are easy meat. The political parties have been infiltrated. There is no doubt that the Liberal Party is nothing like the Liberal Party of the Menzies era. It's a party looking to try and work out what it stands for. And the voters can't work out what it stands for. And that's why it's doing so poorly. Possibly Dutton can recover that. I don't know. I think he's definitely fighting a hell of a headwind. There are a lot of people in his party who just haven't got the memo.
I think Dutton's cut out of a different mold, certainly. But to let everyone know, I've put the link in the chat if anyone wants to call in and ask Kevin a question or make a comment. But Tony's put a comment or a question in the chat. She says, what was the response to that presentation from Barnaby and Craig?
Well, without breaking confidences, look, I've got to tell you, I'm a little biased anyway. I really like Craig Kelly. I wrote to Morrison when he was the member for Cook, and I was in his electorate. And I asked if I might come and speak to him, and I wanted to talk to him about open source software and how it could save the government millions of dollars a year and give rise to an indigenous PC or computer industry. And when I say indigenous, I'm using the term in its proper context, e.g. one that's born in Australia. And Morrison, I've got the letter. In fact, I must send you a copy of the letter. Morrison wrote back and said something to the effect of, I'm disinclined to meet with you. Goodbye. He wouldn't meet with me, right? So I went up to the member for Hughes, who happened to be Craig Kelly. He was across the railway line in Sutherland, and I dropped into his office and I said, look, I wonder, would it be possible for me to speak to Mr. Kelly? I'm down in Avenel Road, Gymea, and really, you know, I'm in Morrison's electorate, but I would love it if Mr. Kelly could spare the time. And he heard me. He said, oh, send him in. So I went in, and he gave me 20 minutes of his time. And this is the real kicker. This is why I really like the guy. At the end of it, he said, Kev, this is well and truly above my head. I'm so up to my neck in so many other issues that I've got to focus on them. And really, I'm not able to help you, but I wish you all the luck. Now, instead of, you know, stroking me and saying, oh, you know, I'll look after or whatever, dead honest, right? So I've always liked Craig Kelly from that time onwards. And he has been right on the major things. I don't know about the minor stuff, and sure, he might have gone with the party at times because he had to or whatever, you know, sort of thought, oh, this is not worth dying in the ditch about, so I'll vote in this direction. But on every major issue, climate change and COVID, Craig Kelly's been absolutely correct. Well, Craig rang me up and he said, I've been thinking about what you're saying, and I think you're right. I said, Craig, that means so much to me. So Craig Kelly thinks I'm right. Now, Barnaby, I don't know where he sits, but he is turning. He is changing. There's no doubt that he's changing.
What I would say is I think we're far too harsh on these people. The environment that they have to operate in, they're pulled in so many different directions, and there's so many different personalities that they have to deal with, and the machinations of politics in general. And they need to survive. So sometimes they need to make deals or jump onto something that they might not completely agree with, just to stay there, so they know that they can do some good by being there. And you can take Craig Kelly as a perfect example. He stood up too much for his views, and now he's not there anymore. So,
but the thing about Craig is he was totally honest with me. That's what got me. You know, he could have said nice things and shown me the door, but he was just absolutely honest and not nasty. He was just honest, and also just to see me, you know, an interloper from another electorate. Yeah, come on in. Let me have a listen to what you got to say. And I had a presentation, as I always do.
That's one of the big things when you contact members of parliament, whether it be state or federal. The first thing they ask you, are you in my electorate? Because if you're not, I'm not dealing with you. So,
well, I don't know if you know about this. You may. Justine Elliott is my federal member in the seat of Richmond. And so I wrote in her webpage form, I said, look, I'd like if you could spare a little bit of time to see me. And the next day I got a phone call from a young man and he said, oh, you asked to see Justine Elliott. I said, yes, I would. I'd really love to, I only want, 15 minutes, but I'd just like to see her. And he said, oh, well, what's it about? I said, well, that's between me and Justine. If you that I want to talk to her about topical issues that are causing me concern. Oh, what are they? And I said, look, he said, well, look, the long and the short of it is you're not going to see her unless you fill out in detail what you want to talk to her about.
Yeah, the gatekeeper. He's a gatekeeper.
So I did. I sent a detailed email. No, don't want to talk to you. So then I contacted all of my supporters and we had a gathering outside her office. 50 odd people turned up. We had signs, everything, because I wanted to talk to her about climate change. I wanted to talk to her about COVID. I wanted to show her those graphs and say, look, this is the truth as far as I know it. And you need to hear this. And then maybe you can go off and ask people. I'd happily leave you with my slides. You can then go and query people and say, look, can you explain this? Because I've got this guy who's an ex-lieutenant colonel, highly educated in thermodynamics, an inventor with a stellar track record of innovation. I have to take him seriously. He's in my electorate, and he's telling me this. And this is all raw data, according to him. We can check whether the data is accurate or not. Can you explain this? Well, no. So she didn't do that. And what they did, they locked the doors and then they called the police. And the police turned up and we were all standing around there. When the police turned up, I made a point of walking over and shaking their hand and saying, look, thank you very much for all the work you guys do. We're really grateful. We're totally peaceful. And I explained to them how this had all come about. I said, look, we promise we're not going to do anything nasty or untoward. And they said, not a problem. That we have to be here. We've been asked to be here, so we have to be here. But you just do what you're doing, because you're not causing any disruption. You're not blocking people on the footpath or anything like that. So, and I can see that you're all, really nice people. So the police were super nice to us, and which is, I suppose, different to Victoria.
You might not be here right now.
A really different
somewhere.
Well, I don't know if I told you this, but when COVID first started, I actually went down to my local police station and asked if I could talk to a senior police officer. And I can't tell who that person was, or in fact, I won't even indicate their gender. But we had a tete-a-tete. I had a tete-a-tete with a very senior police officer. And I said, look, can you please just go lightly with a velvet glove? Don't hurt people. Don't worry about mask mandates. I showed him all the curves that show that masks actually increase the spread of the disease. They don't stop it. And I showed him how there had been gross exaggeration. I actually rang up the health authority in Sweden to verify one of the graphs I had. And at the end of it, the police officer more or less said, yeah, look, I'll spread the word. We'll enforce the law, but we'll be very gentle. And there are far more important things, domestic violence, rapes, and robberies and stuff like that the house break-ins that the police are more interested in. So our police in the Richmond district, if you're listening to me, you're great guys. They're all really good people. Can't speak highly enough of it.
It's important to show that you can influence politicians and public servants like the police in your area by just going and speaking with them. But we're getting a little bit off topic, so I want to focus on separation of powers, because you brought that up during the answer during the Q&A that we just played.
Yes.
Now, I always valued separation of powers very highly. I think there's even a Spectator article that I wrote where I talk about separation of powers, and even Matt Canavan I heard recently talk about the virtues of separation of powers within our system of government, and he's a senator. But it was really you that woke me up to this issue about the legislature and the executive having no real separation. And you even argue there's no separation with the judiciary as well.
There isn't. There isn't.
I want to bring up this. This is from the Parliament of Australia website, the aph.gov.au site, and it's talking about our system of government. And this is an info sheet for that. Now, when it comes to separation of powers, it says political theory recognizes three powers of government: the legislative power to make the laws, the executive power to carry out and enforce the laws, and the judicial power to interpret laws and to judge whether they apply in individual cases. So that makes it very clear for people watching at home who might not understand what we mean by separation of powers. Now, the principle of the separation of powers is that in order to prevent oppressive government, the three powers of government should be held by separate bodies: the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, which act as checks and balances on each other. With parliamentary government, the legislative and executive functions overlaps. And this is where it's talking about Australia specifically.
Yes.
As the members of the executive government, the ministers, are drawn from the parliament. However, in the Australian system, there are still checks and balances between the executive and the legislature. Ministers are subject to the scrutiny of other members of the parliament, led by an officially recognised opposition. In addition, the executive does not necessarily control both houses of the parliament. Now, Kevin, it's admitting to the fact that you're pointing out that there's no real separation between the legislature and the executive, but it is trying to convince people that there still is a separation by these ministers being held to account by the rest of the parliament. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, look, if we selected our ministers from the opposition, then the party which held the confidence of Parliament would be able to scrutinise the opposition acting as ministers over in the departments. You see, the executive branch is duty-bound to carry out the will of Parliament. And therefore, if you were to take your ministers from the political opposition, in other words, those who were in the minority, and put them in charge of the government departments, there is a far greater chance of the government, the party that has the confidence of Parliament, then checking on what the hell they're up to. But you haven't. You've got the criminal checking themselves, because if the government of the day is going to check the ministers, do you think they're ever going to find a scandal?
But you do have parliamentary committees and parliamentary inquiries where you can get a cross representation of all the parties within, working on that committee. And we see Malcolm Roberts, who's a member of One Nation, doing great work within these parliamentary inquiries. And so does Senator Alex Rennick from the Liberal Party and Matt Canavan from the National Party. And you can list a whole heap of others. I've even been told that the Greens do some good work in these parliamentary inquiries as well, God forbid. But is that not good enough, you think?
No, not even close, because there's so much obfuscation and hiding. Look, the public servants themselves, I think I've told you before that I actually applied to be the Chief Information Officer of Defence. And that would have been something like a SES3 position, right up the top, whatever it is. I get confused these days, but close to being secretary. And the one step down from the Secretary of Defence. And I went along for my job interview. There are a number of very senior officers, military officers, who were keen that I become the Chief Information Officer. I'd actually invented the maintenance systems that were used by the Australian Army. And they were pretty revolutionary compared to what they had. And in fact, when they came along and replaced those systems with a one purchase from commercial enterprise, the Army went backwards. But I'm getting off the point. When I went for this interview, I was interviewed by a lady who held a PhD in anthropology. And every time I tried to get technical to say, look, the computer systems within the Department of Defence are more in keeping with a insurance company than they are with an organisation that will one day have a nation state trying to destroy them. And she said, "Oh, I'm not technical. We won't deal with technical stuff." And at the end, I said to her, "I'm not going to get the job, am I?" And she said, "No." And I said, "What are you looking for?" And she said, "Oh, we're looking for a team player." I said, "Yeah, thank you very much." And so I went back and briefed the senior officers, who were very keen that I become the chief information officer, because they were just as aware of what a mess computer systems are in the Department of Defense. And they still are, by the way. The computer systems are just appalling. What happens in the public service is that the team players eventually end up being the secretaries of the department. Another story, I went along to a information officer, and I won't, because I don't want to embarrass people. And I went to them and talked to them about the possibility.
Tony says in the chat, she says team player meaning puppet.
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. In fact, the Yes Minister is actually quite real. That's although it's a comedy, it is actually, there's a lot of stuff that's right on target.
I know you've got a story for us, Kevin, but I really want to dig into this. Do you mind if we?
No. I love it when you take control, mate, because I'll go off on all sorts of tributaries. So keep us.
I'm sure you got 1,000 stories that are all interesting that you can tell us. But back to this document now, it digs into the executive government a little bit more, and it talks about the constitutional provisions. The Constitution states that the executive power of the Commonwealth is vested in the Queen. Now, we're a little bit concerned with they haven't updated a lot of the Constitution to now say king. I mean, the Queen's been dead a while. None of this has been updated. Now, some people may have their own views about that, but we won't go there. It is exercisable by the Governor General as the Queen's representative. However, a realistic understanding of of Australia's executive government cannot be obtained from the Constitution alone. And in fact, a literal reading of the Constitution may be misleading. Well, what?
It really doesn't mean what it says.
So in other words, you're not meant to be reading the Constitution?
No, it's really scary stuff, believe me. What's his name? Brown went to the High Court, and the High Court said, "Oh, look, there is implied in the Constitution something," I forget what it was. And I thought, oh, that's really dangerous ground, because I can take any inference I like from the Constitution if it serves my purposes. No, the Constitution is, in fact, one part of it, I must admit, one aspect of it, I must admit, is that the Constitution is most succinct. The fewer words you say, the less chance there is of a misunderstanding. And it is quite succinct and simple. And there's one thing in there, Section 7, which says that the electors must vote directly for senators or except as Parliament provides. Now, Sir Garfield Barwick opined that the only instrument that Parliament has to change that is a referendum. That's what was meant in the Constitution. It wasn't that they could come up with above and below the line voting. And that I just mentioned that as an example. No, look, the judiciary, the High Court judiciary, was well and truly corrupted by the appointment of Justice Murphy, because Whitlam wanted the United Nations through the World Heritage Organization to be able to control the sovereignty of Australia. And whereas our Constitution forbade that, Murphy said, "Oh no, really it didn't. We'll allow this UN organization to decide, what we should do with certain areas which they will designate to be World Heritage areas." And that's a surrender of our sovereignty. And then native title came along, and that was invented, I think, now many people, I'll drop back a click. I get a chance to really shock people. Many people will tell you that the Mabo decision overcame terra nullius. Have you heard that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the whole point. Well, that's what we're told the whole point of the Mabo decision was.
Bullshit.
Let's explain that a little bit. So
yeah, sure. 148 pages of opinion. And at the end, right at the end of that opinion, it said that the Murray Islands belong without any shadow of a doubt to Queensland, to the government of Queensland, not to Eddie Mabo or anybody else, because there is a lineage running from George III all the way through to the present day. The legitimate owners of Murray Island and so forth is for the Queensland government, unless the federal government orders otherwise, legislates otherwise. And so Keating came out with the Native Title Act. That's why we got the Native Title Act. The High Court said that terra nullius existed effectively in their ruling. And you see how the communists have completely perverted it. Everybody's being told that the High Court overruled terra nullius. It didn't. I can send you the opinion.
So
it's in their opinion, 148 opinion.
So this is my understanding, and you might feel free to correct me, but when Captain Cook was sent on his voyage, he was told that if you came across a civilization of indigenous people, then you needed to make a treaty with them. So that's what he did in New Zealand.
People. Yeah, native people. Yeah.
And in New Zealand, he had the Waikati Treaty because he felt that the Maoris were, I guess, civilized enough to be able to form, or had a leadership to be able to form that treaty. But when he came to Australia, they didn't feel as though the Aboriginal people had that, and that's what they called terra nullius. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, terra nullius really wasn't invented at that time. It was a term that came about in the mid-1800s, and it meant basically a land with nothing. And by the nothing, they meant that there was no system of government, no currency, no written codified laws, nothing that you could work off. There wasn't any form of united tribes with whom you could negotiate.
And that had a lot to do with the voice as well, because they can't have a treaty with the Aboriginal people because they're so fragmented in different tribes. So the voice was meant to represent all those different tribes.
They're still trying the old treaty. They're still trying to have a treaty. And once again, it's a communist conspiracy to erode property rights. So, John Locke, the great philosopher of the 1700s, 1800s, in fact, 1700s, I lie. He stressed that property is a foundation stone of democracy. The right to own property is a foundation stone. And what's the WEF telling us? What's Klaus Schwab telling us? You will own nothing and you will be happy, right? It's the whole thing all fits together like a jigsaw. And they're still doing it. I mean, New South Wales is playing silly buggers with land ownership and so-called treaties and all this other sort of rubbish. Native title should not exist. And if we were to change our constitution, then I believe we need to get rid of Section 51, subsection 26, which at present confers upon the Commonwealth the right to make special laws on the basis of a citizen's race. That's actually in our constitution right this moment. We should get rid of that, and we should put in a clause which specifically prohibits any government at any level within the Commonwealth of Australia and any government-funded entity from making laws which discriminate on the basis of a citizen's race, gender, or ancestral heritage. The moment you do that, the Aboriginal industry is unconstitutional. Aboriginal welfare is unconstitutional. And so that's what we really ought to do.
Let's go back to this document because I actually want to get to the actual constitution in a moment. But it says here that neither the Prime Minister nor the Cabinet are mentioned in the Constitution. Now, I want to hear your thoughts about this, Kevin. The framers of the Constitution took their existence for granted, as they did the various conventions of the Westminster system of government inherited from the United Kingdom.
Look, I think that you could reasonably assume that they expected that there would be a cabinet of ministers selected from the government of the day who would oversee the executive. Now, the executive was supposed to be the Governor General in council, and that actually evolved from the very first military settlement where the governor, Arthur Phillip, came to the conclusion that he could not run the military establishment which it wasn't a colony at that stage, it was a military settlement, he couldn't run it without involving those persons of influence, and they were people who had money. So he formed what he called his council. And we've then evolved that into the Governor-General in council. The reality is the Governor-General has virtually no power whatsoever other than to fire the government of the day if it can't pass supply. That's about the limit.
So this is, again, the Parliament of Australia website, and they've got the Constitution here. This is Chapter 2, which focuses on the executive government. Yeah. And it's not too long. It's probably about 10 points or something like that. It's not right. As you said, it's limited, but that So executive power, the executive power of the Commonwealth is vested in the Queen. So again, they haven't updated it to King.
Yeah.
And is exercisable by the Governor General as the Queen's representative, and extends to the execution and maintenance of this Constitution and of the laws of the Commonwealth. And then the next point is the Federal Executive Council, which you just touched upon. There shall be a Federal Executive Council to advise the Governor-General in the governing of the Commonwealth, and the members of the council shall be chosen and summoned by the Governor-General and sworn as executive councillors, and shall hold office during his pleasure. Now, could you argue that these are the 2 points you could argue? Could the Governor-General technically form this executive council of essentially ministers based on anyone within the Australian population? But by convention, he's been doing that from the Parliament, and that's why we have the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, the ministers, controlling the executive.
The Governor-General is selected by the Parliament, and you've got an incestuous relationship there where the Parliament would only select somebody that they can be sure won't rock the boat. According to our Constitution, if the Governor-General wanted to, and I would approve of this, the Governor-General could say, listen, I can't find anybody in the Parliament that I can trust, so I wish to form an executive council from anybody that I wish to choose. And as a matter of sort of deference and respect, I will go to the Senate and seek their approval of my selection. I will argue to the Senate so as to keep this transparent, so that you're sure I'm not just putting my mates in here. And I would like to see the Governor-General select the best people in the world to be his council. And the ministers, the cabinet ministers, then form the role which Queen Victoria intended, and that is they are simply the eyes and the ears of the legislature. They have no power. They can't tell anybody in any government department what they can or can't do. They are simply there as almost like spies. They're selected by the legislature to go over there and keep an intimate look on what the hell's happening in each department and report back to the legislature. It's far better than a committee. You've got people who are able to go and look at in detail what the heck's happening, tour around the education department and so forth, but they can't tell anybody to do anything. That's how it should run.
But here's my question. So let's say the Governor-General said, well, I want Peter Cosgrove to be the Minister of Defence. Well, yes. Peter Cosgrove isn't in the Parliament. Could he be the Minister of Defence?
Yes. So he wouldn't be the minister. He'd say, look, I want Peter Cosgrove to be on my executive council, and he will effectively look after the Department of Defence. He will control the Secretary of the Department of Defence, and he will advise me as to whether that secretary is doing his job properly, and also advise me as to whether I should get a replacement and the merits of a replacement. And that's then you've effectively got the American system where the people are selected by the president, and your Governor-General takes on the role of a president effectively. And then you've got true separation.
We're seeing that in America. I mean, Donald Trump's already talking about who would be on his team.
Yeah.
You know, he's mentioning people like Vivek Ramaswamy, also Tulsi Gabbard, who's a Democrat, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's a Democrat, Elon Musk, who's not even a politician.
I am so looking forward to RFK getting control of health. and doing, I really love the guy. I love what he stands for. I don't like his socialist ideas. I don't think he's right there. But there's so much. It's just going to be so fantastic. You would really have a government for the people if you pull this. If the Trump pulls this off,
but
it will be fantastic.
If we follow the letter of the Constitution, we could have the same here.
Exactly. Yeah, but you won't find a governor general who would do it. And what's more, the legislature can fire the governor general. Just basically say your time's up. We're getting another guy. That was what the race was between Kerr and Whitlam. It was who could pull the trigger first. Because Whitlam was bent on governing without supply. That was what the Khamenei affair was all about. He was going to get oil money from the Saudis or somewhere in the Middle East to run the government of Australia. King Charles got his head cut off for that.
So here's another question for you. We saw during COVID, Scott Morrison assume a number of ministries.
Yes.
So that just needs to be approved by the Governor General, and then he can do that. And is that what happened?
Yeah. And it's most unsatisfactory. I really don't understand why Morrison did what he did, but it was crazy stuff.
Tony says they'll never appoint a Governor General with the conviction required to do it.
Absolutely right, Tony. Yeah,
bang on. But here's a question. Another question. Let's say the Prime Minister and the Governor General were in cahoots and wanted to have a dictatorship of sorts.
That's right.
They could do that, couldn't they? What's to stop them?
Yes, they could. Well, you only have to look at what's happening now in the UK, and Keir Starmer could easily take on the power of Hitler, and there's really nothing to stop him. There's actually been a movie, a serial, where a Prime Minister goes out of control in the British system, and it's really scary. That's why you're supposed to have the separation. That's why the people of Australia should be electing a Governor General and the governors. We need to totally reform the constitutions in our states. This house is built on bad foundations. The states are the foundation of the federation. And the constitution in every state is awful, just awful.
So that's what you would have. Instead of the Governor General being selected by the legislature, you would have him elected, or he or her.
Yeah. And a discerning voter public would vote for somebody who has a proven track record of running a business efficiently, preferably somebody who created the business, not somebody who walked into AMP and ruined it, or for that matter, Apple. You want to actually elect somebody to be your chief executive who actually created businesses and ran them successfully. That's the sort of person you want in that job. You don't want a politician. You want your legislature to be the politicians. They're supposed to represent us. And I made the point during my talk on stage, it's impossible for a minister with portfolio to properly represent his constituents. He's got to give 100% of himself either to his job over there in the ministry or to his constituents. It's a crazy system, very bad system.
Some people might be screaming at the screen right now and saying, we do have a separation of powers. We have a Senate and we have a House of Representatives. Well, technically, they're within the legislature.
They're in the legislature. And the idea of the Senate is that, once again, politicians can never be trusted. That's what the American founders concluded, and I agree with them. You cannot trust politicians. People become politicians for a variety of reasons, and very few of them go in there to do good. They go there because, they get paid. There's ego. There are all manner of reasons why people end up as politicians. You cannot trust them. And so, therefore, rightly, we came to the conclusion we needed a House of Representatives and a Senate, and we wanted the Senate to be of a different political complexion to the House of Representatives. I mentioned that during my talk. And that's why the Senate has a different voting cycle, 6 years, and that's why a senator is drawn from the states. You've got 12 of them, regardless of the size of your state. And that was done deliberately so that hopefully the senators would be different. What they didn't count on was strong political parties. Because if you've got the Greens and Labor dominant in the lower house and in the Senate, draconian legislation will get a wave through. They'll steal your property. They'll tax you to oblivion. They're doing it even now. Like, for example, I ran small business, and then Gillard and Rudd brought in that I had to allow people after 10 years of working in my small business to go away for 3 months on fully paid long service leave. Now, no small businessman can afford that. It's just not possible. You know, the workers' compensation, the superannuation, the long service leave, the unfair dismissal. If you are a small businessman now, you stand a good chance of losing your house and your family.
Well, another good example is the misinformation and disinformation legislation. How do you stop it if the Labor and the Greens control both houses of the Parliament? And I know they don't completely control the Senate. They probably need Pocock and a couple others.
Yep. Well, you know, somebody told me that Pocock's been hit too many times around the head. I'd love to actually sit down and have a tete-a-tete to him, because I've sort of studied his life, and he is a very disciplined and determined person. And I think that if I were to have, you know, long meaningful discussions with him, that he would say, "Oh dear, Kev, I can see what you're getting at now." Like I think I've had an influence on you, Stephen, where we've talked and you've sort of started thinking, "Oh, geez, you're right. This is a worry." Now, Pocock's, you know, got a family and most probably got grandchildren by now. He's got skin in the game, like all of us. What I'm talking about crosses party boundaries, because just as Labor and the Greens could do this to the Liberals and the Nationals and whatever, so too those parties, if they gain the ascendancy, they will do that to the Labor and the Greens.
Of course. Yeah.
You know, we've all got a vested interest in keeping this country safe from draconian legislation that will ruin the future for our kids, our grandchildren, and their successors.
That's an excellent point. Here's a big question for you, Kevin. We talk about a republic, but would we need to go to a republic if we just had a referendum that inserted one clause in the Constitution in Chapter 2 of the executive that said that the Governor General needed to be elected by the people of Australia? Would that be enough?
It would. And I tell you why it would, because over time, things would evolve. It would become evident that certain things have to happen. And by the way, in there as well, that the Governor General can select the heads of his departments and that he can select the people who will be in his council.
Well, yeah, so that's already within the Constitution. So appointment of civil servants, there's a clause for that. Command of the naval and military forces.
Yes.
So you could almost say that a lot of this points to the American system. They
were heavily influenced by the American system, by the way. That's where they came up with the Senate. The framers of our Constitution were heavily influenced. I've read the biographies of Alfred Deakin, Andrew Fisher, and Edmund Barton. And yes, it was an amazing time in our history because they all cooperated with each other. They all had an interest in forming this federal government. And they looked at the problem they faced was that they still had a monarch and they were still British subjects, and they couldn't break away from that short of having a revolution. So they had to accommodate the monarch. We won't call it a king or a queen. They had to accommodate the monarch in their system of government. Well, we've moved on from that now. We now call it the King of Australia, and that's that's interesting, because that goes back to my previous question. If the Australian people were to elect the Governor General, then the Governor General no longer becomes the representative of the Queen. So then we would, by definition, become a republic. Yeah. It doesn't mean we can't still remain members of the Commonwealth. We share that history, and it's a beautiful thing. So it doesn't stop us from being members of the Commonwealth. It just simply means that from now on, we will elect our chief executive.
But would that have to be, and I keep saying Queen because that's what it's got written here, but the King.
Yeah.
So if we did have a referendum that said we want our Governor General to be elected by the people, would we then have to go to the UK and King Charles and say, we need this approved, or could he veto it, or is there any provision there?
No, if the people of Australia have a referendum and they say this is what we want, then we write a letter to the British Parliament saying we respectfully, we love you guys. We want to still remain a member of the Commonwealth, but we have decided that we must change our government to this model. And we know you will understand. We're not asking for your approval, for we are now a sovereign nation. And that repairs, by the way, many people will tell you that the present government is illegal because of what Whitlam did. But, and I say to them, yes, you could be right, but the way we can fix that is doing what I've just proposed, because you more or less say, yeah, look, they did the wrong thing, but we're going to now fix it up by saying that we will elect our governors at state level and we will elect our Governor General. And by the way, there is a need for Queensland to have its Legislative Council restored. If you read the history of that, it's nothing short of appalling, the way the Labor government got rid of it in about 1922. It's just appalling.
It's amazing.
And once again, we come back to this idea that anybody who wants to serve in the upper house must disavow themselves of all political parties and all political organisations, unions and so forth. They must disavow themselves of that. They've got to be a political agnostic. And when they run for office.
That's the Adam Zara special, right? He said that the Senate should be all independents.
Yeah, and I agree. And if they do that, if just like you have to disavow yourself of another nationality if you're running for federal parliament, and by the way, that should be the case throughout all of our parliaments, it's more or less sending an unequivocal message that you are an Australian. The only thing that matters is what's good for Australians. So forget about your past history. You may have been a Brit, or you might have been an American or a German or whatever. You're saying, I am an Australian, 100% Australian. Well, when you go into the Senate, you're saying, I'm independent. I'm 100% independent. Sure, I came out of the Labor Party, or I came out of the Country Party, National Party. I came out of the Liberal Party, One Nation or whatever. But now I disavow myself of all of these political parties and the unions and any federation, any political federation. My sole interest is to vet legislation and ensure that it's not abusive or capricious. So then you've got a true House of Review.
The federal constitution, if you want to change a single letter of that, you need to go to a referendum. It's not the same with the states, and we've discussed this before.
Yes.
The states' constitutions can be changed via legislation of the parliament.
Yes.
Now, Tony has asked the question, how is a review of the state constitution initiated?
By the people of each state. And the only way, the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm hopeful that I can get a discussion going. We've got this fantastic technology now called the internet, where we can reach everybody. And really, in our federal constitution, we should lay down frameworks that every state must abide by. That is to say, every state must have an upper and a lower house. Every state must elect its governor. There must be a proper separation of powers. Every state must elect its attorney general, and the attorney general must not be a member of the legal fraternity, never have practiced law. And there's a reason for that you can then be assured that the attorney general will be a citizen constantly, critically looking at what's happening in the judiciary. The judiciary's prime function is to protect us from bad law. That's its prime function, but it's lost its way. that, we have this biblical thing that it's better to let 100 guilty go free than to convict an innocent person. Well, that's what our judiciary should be modeled upon, but it's not. Huge injustice is done daily now by our judiciary, and it's got to be reformed. And the person who can do it is an attorney general who's not part of the judiciary. Says, oh, that doesn't pass the pub test. Like Helen Rolfe dismissing Dr. Julian Fidge on the grounds that he didn't have standing. And yet Helen Rolfe worked for Pfizer or had a close relationship with Pfizer for about 5 years. She should have recused herself from that hearing, full stop. She didn't. Now, if you had an elected attorney general who was a citizen, not a member of the judiciary, that person, there would be a much higher probability that person would say, oh, hold on a second, you've erred. You've erred so seriously that I have totally lost my confidence in you, Justice Rolfe. You must resign. I never want to see you again in my judiciary.
Now, the current Attorney General is Mark Dreyfus.
Yes.
A lot of people wouldn't even know that. So it's interesting that you're saying that the Attorney General should be a significant position, significant enough that it should be elected by the Australian people, but you're saying it shouldn't be a lawyer. So basically what you're saying is the Attorney General should keep the judiciary in check.
Yep.
But they shouldn't be a lawyer.
That's right.
How will they understand the legal process?
Because
you might just get a Muppet in there.
No. Firstly, the Australian people are electing this person. And what you want, once again, is somebody who knows how to run a business and somebody who has common sense. You do not have to know the law to know that something is unjust or that this is wrong. And you say, then a judge or a lawyer could come along and say, look, actually, Kevin, you don't understand. This is the situation, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of it, that person, the Attorney General, might say, yes, look, I do understand it, or no, it's still, I can't agree with this. This is wrong. This is an injustice to the Australian people. I can't, like, for example, Julian Assange being kept for God knows how many years and never being charged. We have a thing called habeas corpus. Within 24 hours, you're supposed to be brought before a magistrate and charged with a criminal offence if you're having if you're basically in a custodial situation. They kept him for years and years and years. Now, an Attorney General, not related to the law, not beholden to the government, would go, this is wrong. And as Tucker Carlson says, get a couple of destroyers and sail them up the Thames and shoot the shit out of the Parliament House until they release Julian Assange. You either charge him or release him, but you don't carry on with this nonsense. He's an Australian citizen. That's what it should mean.
Tony says, clearly all of these corruptions had the long-term objective of replacing nationalism with globalism. Yeah. Malcolm Roberts, Jared Rennick, and others.
Absolutely.
Good
Bang on.
Attorney Generals.
Bang on. Malcolm Roberts, particularly because he's an ex-engineer. And what you need is somebody who will run the judiciary efficiently. You need to bring in more or less factory processes, you could call them, without prejudicing the quality of the output. But you need a highly efficient organisation to be able to process criminal charges and so forth. I was actually outside the Chinese embassy. I had to get a consulate, rather. I had to get a visa for some people to go into China. And the car that I was in got tailed by a taxi. 3 policemen turned up to, work out what had happened. None of them had a recording device. They pull out a bloody notebook and a pencil, and it took us about 3 hours with 3 policemen. Now, that's not efficient. And I'm looking at this as a systems man saying, hey, this is crazy. You really ought to have a voice recorder. You ought to have a template for what you do what questions you ask in a traffic accident. You record it. The voice recording is sent back by electronic means to a stenosec who is skilled in typing up evidence briefs, and that person types up the evidence briefs and you only need one policeman, maybe two at the most, and the job's done in 20 minutes and it's done properly. Now that's efficiency. And you can do the same thing in the courts. The inefficiencies that go on in our courts are unbelievable. And I won't tell you how I know that, but yeah, I know it, right? And if you got somebody in like a Malcolm Roberts, he'd sort the place out.
Okay, so let's review. Obviously, this is a very complex issue of reforming our government, and there's a lot more other things that we could talk about. But of the things that we discussed, you started off by talking about the inadequacies of policy with climate change, COVID, a whole bunch of different things.
We're being attacked.
Yep. So what we would do is we would have the Attorney General and the Governor General elected.
Yeah.
So that would probably have to be done through a referendum.
Yes.
So we take that to the people. The Senate would be completely independent. So
yes.
everyone elected to the Senate would have no party affiliation. So completely independent.
Nor union affiliation. They're not allowed to belong to a union, not allowed to belong to a federation. You don't have any. They're nothing can control them. They have to be independent, truly independent.
The Governor General would be able to operate like a president of the United States, where they would completely control the executive. They would run the executive. They could appoint heads of departments, and they could also appoint their cabinet, which is what
exactly
happens in America.
With the approval, the only check there is that they would go across to the Senate to get the Senate's approval for their appointments. And if there was a deadlock, you need a method of resolving the deadlock.
But that wouldn't require a referendum because those provisions are already in the Constitution. Is that correct?
Well, the business of them appointing these people and getting approval of the Senate, I don't think that's mentioned in our Constitution.
Okay, so that's the only part that wouldn't require a referendum. But the actual mechanisms of the Governor General being able to appoint
that's right,
all these positions, that's already in the Constitution.
Yep. And what a wonderful thing it would be if you had a Senate that was truly independent and you had a Governor General selecting people, and the Senate dispassionately, unbiased, decided whether the Governor General's choice was a good one or where the Governor General's just looking after his mates. It would be just a fabulous thing, in my view.
And lastly, all this would be extended also to the states.
Yes. Yeah, you actually say to the states. And this brings us into another thing I can't stress enough, that no government or government-funded entity can make laws that discriminate on the basis of race, gender, or ancestral heritage. That's got to be, I'm putting that as the top priority. If I could pull that off, I will save the Australian public about $30 billion a year and actually do an awful lot of good for Aboriginal people.
Okay, so if you want to read more into Kevin's thoughts, I suggest you head to kevinloughrey.com. As he said, if you just hit the ideas and opinions, you hit election reforms, or if you want to get there directly, you just go kevinloughrey.com.au/election/reforms, and you'll get there.
.html, yeah.
Yep, .html.
Yep.
There's a bunch of different links in there. There's a whole bunch of his presentations. I mean, it's quite lengthy, detailed stuff. So I do encourage everyone to go through that and flesh out more of what Kevin has got floating around in his head. Obviously, we've done multiple podcasts related to a lot of these issues, and we could go into more depth with other issues as well. But I think the stuff that we talked about today, if we could correct some of those things, it would be a far different country that we would have here that would be a true separation of powers.
And we'd be immunized to some extent, inoculated against the effects of enemies, domestic and foreign, that are presently wreaking havoc. If they continue with this renewable energy rubbish, they will drive us back to the Stone Age. They're going to destroy the Australian economy, and we'll be left with stranded assets. There'll be bloody windmills and solar cells all over this country, and we're not going to know how to dispose of them. They will have wrecked everything, and they're spending billions of dollars. It's all going to communist China. And we're getting these things which have a limited life of up to 20 years, some of them a lot less. It's just, they are literally wrecking us. And I've already contacted the Department of Defense, the Minister, the Secretary, the service chiefs, and the Chief of the Defence Force about the idea of converting carbonaceous material into liquid fuels, and that we ought to set up these plants all over Australia. I got a letter back from Major General Jason Walk, and it's a word salad. I'm going to write back to Jason and also to the minister and so forth and say, look, this doesn't work. That we've got to do more than these sort of platitudes.
Yeah. Well, we better finish up. But Kevin, thank you again. Thank you for having the courage to have these conversations. You're on the stage at a forum with a number of former and current parliamentarians and influential people, and you didn't back down with your views, even though they tried to wrap you up at the end there. It was
that was beautiful. I really enjoyed that. There's a certain mischievous nature of me that I really enjoyed that. I really did. But I also, as I said, I was really surprised at how I spoke. I was really impressed by myself that it was all there in my head and I just let it come out. It was great. And I hope everybody's enjoyed this. And Stephen, once again, thank you very, very much for giving me a platform. I'm very grateful. And let's keep on it.
We're very grateful to have you, Kevin, because no one else is having these conversations that I can find. And if it hadn't been for you, I would have gone on my merry way singing the praises of separation of powers in this country, not knowing that there is not a true separation of powers, although I'm sure there's some people out there who will argue against, and I'm sure we'd have a debate on this podcast if they want to present themselves. But
I'd be delighted.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Now, I appeal to the audience every week to share this out because we rely on our audience to get this information out there. I think this is a discussion that is not taking place on any other platform. This is unique to Commanding the Narrative just because we have a conduit to Kevin himself. So if you can get this out there, please do so. I think this is an important discussion that we need to have in this country. We should always be tinkering with our system of government, just like the rugby league does. If you look at the rules of rugby league, it's evolved over time because they're always tinkering with it and trying to make the game better. We should be doing the same thing with our parliament. We should always be striving to make it better and more representative for the people and enhancing the freedoms and the prosperity of the people. And it's discussions and conversations like this that hopefully will lead to that. So I say it every week. Please share. Follow Kevin. Head to his website, head to his social media and follow Kevin. And also give us a follow and a like if you haven't on our social media as well. But Kevin, thank you again. Thank you to the audience, and we'll see you all next time.